we're going to start kind of big picture when we're talking about water, because it's really important to understand the larger concept of how water moves throughout really the state, but also throughout the layers of the earth, both above and below ground. And then we're going to hone into stormwater. And as we do an extension, we will end with things that you can do to help support our local water resources. So 2 key concepts that you will hear me reference throughout today's presentation are, when we're talking about water, everything is connected to everything else, and everything goes somewhere. So keep those in mind. So again, stepping back, thinking big picture when it comes to water. When we talk about water in Florida, we can kind of broadly categorize them 2 ways. One is above ground, which is probably how most of us think about water, what we can actually see: rivers, lakes, ponds, the ocean. And we refer to that as surface water. However, the majority of water in the state is actually found beneath our feet in something called aquifers, which you may be familiar with that term. We'll talk more about that in a second. And anything below our ground is referred to as groundwater. Now remember what I said with the big theme with water, right? It's all connected and it all goes somewhere. So it's really important to remember that water is dynamic. So just because we see it as a surface water doesn't mean it's always going to remain as a surface water, and vice versa. And one main way that groundwater becomes surface water is through something called springs, which we are very well known for in the state. And actually, we have more first magnitude springs than any other state in the country. So a very well-known resource. But again, this is where we can actually physically observe where groundwater is coming up to become surface water. And here is a map that highlights documented known springs in the area. So we have a few here for those of you that are joining from Pinellas County. Now, perhaps a new word or term or concept is something called a swallet or swallette. Excuse me. I just ate my lunch. Swallow. Here we go. So for this term or concept, this is kind of the opposite. This is when a surface water kind of slowly, as you can see in this long exposure image, the water is slowly kind of spiraling around and falling down into a sinkhole. So you can see here a swallet. There's an opening where a river or stream, or a portion of it, disappears underground into a sinkhole. So not as obvious, but we do have some, again, in the area, not as many as our springs, but this is a map of the documented swallets that we have in the region. Now, when we're looking at that groundwater, so water beneath our feet, I mentioned this idea of aquifers. You may have heard of karst topography. That's kind of what underlies the state, limestone rock. And there's different layers within our aquifer because of something. There's confining layers you may have heard of, or clay layers. And if you've ever taken a soils class, you know that clay particles are basically like the smallest particles that we have. And so when clay particles get compacted, it basically becomes like an impenetrable portion or layer underneath the surface. And we'll look more at that in the next image. But these are the different layers of the aquifer, going from shallow, superficial, so at the surface, aquifer system. And then if you go a little bit deeper down, we have this intermediate aquifer system. And then you have to go even further, and then you can see the Floridan aquifer, there's no extra I there, underlies not only the whole state of Florida, but extends into Georgia and neighboring states as well. So that's just kind of some things to keep in mind about just, again, how dynamic the water is, and that it's a little bit more complex than maybe what we're taught in school. And this graphic does a really good job highlighting these dynamic movements and interactions and these confining layers that I talked about. So here at the surface, again, closest to the surface, we have the superficial aquifer system. And then if you go lower, this kind of, I want to say clay colored, salmon colored layer, this is that clay confining layer. So it basically separates from this next layer, the intermediate aquifer system. Then there's another layer, And then we get into the largest underlying layer, which is the florid and aquifer system. So that's all good and well, that's what's there. But of course, we have human interaction that kind of allows this water to move in various ways. So there's artesian wells, there can be wells that we use to pump out water, groundwater up to whether to use for a variety of purposes and reasons. We have sinkholes, which we're very well known for in Florida, recharge area where water can actually seep down into the soil, recharge the aquifer. You've probably heard of that. Springs, again, which we talked about before. So all these different dynamic ways that water can move and flow throughout the system, all pretty much below our feet. And I alluded to the water cycle. So this is just like another image showing, what we're all taught in elementary school with these common terms: condensation, precipitation, evaporation, transpiration, and how water moves in this picture. This is like the best I can find that doesn't include snow and mountains. So you're welcome for us Floridians here. But there's always something that I feel like is really critical and missing in the water cycle that is often not featured. So I'm going to challenge you. I didn't mention this at the beginning. If you're familiar with Zoom, you have an option for chat somewhere on your screen, probably on the bottom. There's a little chat icon. If you want to engage that way, you can click on that and then you should be able to type your message. If you think you know what is missing from this cycle, like what else should be in this image that is not, especially in our area. I'll give you that hint. Okay, good question. And I didn't mention, I will answer all the questions at the end. So I see some good questions coming in. Anyone know what's missing from the picture? Oh wait, I think I had a little, what's missing? I didn't have any takers in my last webinar, so. Okay. The ocean, houses. Yeah, so houses definitely gets at it. It's people. People, development, and how we interact with the water cycle is often kind of a really big piece that's missing in the water cycle that we teach in elementary school. So we're going to talk people for a minute, and specifically looking at Pinellas County, because that's where I'm based out of. So this is kind of a satellite aerial imagery of northern Pinellas County. If you're familiar with Lake Tarpon, that's where these kind of snapshots are taking place. So you can see right down here is the tip of Old or Upper Tampa Bay. This is all Oldsmar right down here, just for kind of reference. So this is from 1926, when, believe it or not, and this is not a typo, the population in Pinellas County was 28,000 people, which is just really hard for me to fathom. And if we fast forward to the latest census data, the population, I can say roughly is just shy of 1 million people. And I'm not the best at math, but I think if I did it correctly, it's over a 3,000% increase in about a 100-year time frame. So when we're adding that many people, you bet that we are going to have some significant impacts to our local water resources, a lot of which is visible, right? Just in comparing, if you did like a highlights magazine of what's different, compare and contrast these images, right? Now we have a very clear, so this is my work, that's that little icon. I'm way up here in Brooker Creek Preserve, which is very clearly outlined. I always say to people, it's like the only green you see on the map when you look at Pinellas County, because all of this is now developed. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Then let's talk about rain. So Florida, right, we're known for our afternoon thunderstorms, especially this time of year. Well, we're waiting for those to come back. So I pulled data from 2024, and during 2024, we overall throughout the state got 56 inches of rain, but 38 inches of the 56 was during our rainy season, which we broadly classify as like May through October. So it's not like a nice even spread. We have wet seasons and dry seasons in Florida, and that's really important to consider when we're talking about stormwater and water management, which we're going to dive into. So pre-development. So if we think back to that 1926 image that I showed you before, like 28,000 people in all of Pinellas County, this might be how the water cycle worked in that time. So we have mostly natural ground cover. Okay, so we have a little rain event that happens, and that water, when it hits the ground, has the opportunity and ability to infiltrate into the soil. Okay, if you had 25, whether it's deep or shallow, about 50% of that water is infiltrating into the soil. About 10% of it is going to slowly run off across the land, and then a large portion is going to go to evapotranspiration, whether that's just evaporating off the landscape or through the plants through the process of respiration. Now, if we kind of think back to the 2021 image, more of a post-development, really what most of Pinellas County actually looks like, we're looking at a scenario with about 75 to 100% impervious cover. So in this scenario, okay, so now we have a rain event, that water is going to hit the ground, and it's hitting very hard surfaces, roads, parking lots, driveways, you name it, sidewalks. And that water, only about 10 to 15% of it has the ability to infiltrate down into the soil. So what's happening with the rest, right? Some of it's still evaporating or evapotranspiration, right? There's less plants to do that. And then we're now looking at 55% of that water that's running off across the landscape. That's a huge water management issue. Huge issue. So this is what we're really going to dive in and explore. So I know there's a lot on this picture, so just stay with me. I'm going to walk you through it. When we look at, again, these kind of two different pre-development and post-development scenarios in the case of a storm event. So we'll start again with pre-development, which is this solid line. Okay, so we're going to follow this solid line. Base flow is basically just like the level of the water normally, if you will, for like any body of water. And this arrow down is going to indicate a large storm event. Okay, so pre-development, we have our base flow, we get a large storm event, and remember, about 50% of that water is going to infiltrate into the soil, and only about 10% is running off. So there's going to be this slow 10% of water that's running off to a nearby body of water that's going to slowly increase this base flow. So it's slowly going to go up, and then also, right, everything has to go somewhere, so it's going to gradually recede once it flows out to its final destination. If we look at the same scenario in a post-development setting, okay, so we're starting already at a lower base flow just due to how we've kind of changed the hydrology above ground. So we have this lower base flow to start with, we get a large storm event. Now when it rains, remember, we're looking at about 55% of that water that's going to be running off. It has to go somewhere. Everything has to go somewhere. And so now that water is going to rush to a nearby body of water at a very fast rate and a very high volume. So it's going to go up, up, up very quickly. And then again, everything has to go somewhere. And so it's going to drop really, really quickly as well. And this kind of very rapid peak and drop has significant consequences, which is what we're going to explore next. But first, okay, so that's the big picture. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of stormwater. I'm going to see if anyone's still with me by responding or doing an emoji or anything in the chat. And as long as I see one person still with me, I'm going to keep going. Okay, I got a giggle. So at least Ariel is still with me. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to dive into Stormwater 101 right after I get a quick sip of water. Okay, so just to be clear, when we're talking about stormwater, there's many definitions, but generally speaking, this is a pretty concise one. Stormwater is rainwater that runs off streets, lawns, and other sites. So we already looked at that in those images. Once that water hits a particular surface, any of it that runs off, we call that stormwater. Some people put the words together and say stormwater runoff. Some people drop the stormwater and just call it runoff. We're all talking about the same thing. So why are we doing this? Well, I already mentioned that we have kind of self-declared, we in the person of Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and several of our local municipalities have declared Stormwater Stewardship Month for the month of May. And so we're doing our best to educate people about stormwater in a variety of ways. Stormwater is also considered one of the greatest threats to clean water in the United States. And right, because we care. I care, not only because it's my job, but I care as an individual and a human that is raising two other humans. And you obviously care because you're here taking time out of your day. And so anytime we can be informed, right, we can hopefully better the environment. So when we're talking about stormwater and specifically looking at quantity, so remember I talked about like that big peak and drop. That rapid movement of water can lead to something called erosion. And erosion can have significant issues in itself. Of course, we're like losing property, so you can think of it as property loss, but also in terms of kind of the ecological impacts, it can lead to something called stream widening and down cutting. So we're, again, altering kind of the flow and hydrology of the water as the sides of a creek slowly erode away. It's getting wider. And then also kind of creates like a channelization, which if any of you have ever heard or learned about the Kissimmee, the channelization of the Kissimmee River, right? Anytime we're kind of channelizing a body of water, it's really not beneficial from an ecological standpoint for anything, for the water resources or the wildlife that live there. It can also lead to flooding, which I know might be a touchy subject for some of you on this call, right? Probably all of us interacted with some form of flooding last year, whether it was directly or indirectly through family and friends. So when we have these large quantities of water that are coming, right, again, it all has to go somewhere. And if we don't have systems in place to handle it, of course, last year was an extreme example. But right, that is stormwater that we were dealing with, well, at least with the second storm. First one was storm surge, which is a separate thing from what we're talking about today. Then we can also have sewage overflows, which I'm going to talk more about in a second, because that might not be a very obvious connection when you're thinking about stormwater. How does stormwater connect with dumping partially treated sewage? Okay. First, I should have warned you about this too. I think this is my only pop quiz that I have, so maybe it'll just be Ariel, oh, and Anastasia that respond, but it's 50-50 shot, true or false. Stormwater is treated through the same process and system as wastewater. I should say in Florida. Is this true or false? Okay, we've got mixed answers so far. Majority are saying false. I feel like I should insert a drum roll sound. So it is false. So the majority of you got it correct. Stormwater is not treated through the same process and system as wastewater, at least not intentionally. And we'll talk about that in a second. So I can't even take credit for this, but through the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, they have created these amazing graphics that we've been trying to share on all of our social media. So this is one of them that just highlights what I just said. So when it rains, it drains. So any of these culverts, stormwater, curb inlets, whatever you want to call them, that most of us probably don't ever think about. We drive right by them all the time. That is what's collecting our rainwater. And as it says here, most stormwater runoff is not treated before entering our local ponds, lakes, rivers, and bays. So we'll have some connection to some nearby, whether it's directly to the bay, directly to the Gulf, to a stormwater pond or other body of water. It's typically a direct connection with no treatment. And this is just a different visual that highlights that to hopefully like fully grasp, because I don't think a lot of people that don't work in this world, it's really foreign. Again, once you flush something or water goes down the drain, we don't think about it because we don't have to. And praise God for all the people that do the work behind the scenes. So any water that leaves your home, so here we have when you flush the toilet, you're doing laundry, and the water drains from your washing machine, right? Shower, bath, any water that's leaving your home through the pipes goes down something called the private lateral. That's actually the portion that you as a homeowner own. You own this portion here. And then as soon as it connects to the main, what we call sanitary sewer system, this is what your local city or county owns and manages. So that water is going to flow through miles and miles of pipes to a local or nearby, or maybe not so nearby, wastewater treatment facility. And then it gets treated. And that process is incredibly complex and very, very fascinating. If you ever get the chance to tour a wastewater treatment facility, highly recommend. I know that sounds weird. It's a little smelly, but it's totally worth it. Now, on the other side, we're looking at the stormwater, totally separate system. So here, when it rains, again, water is going to collect into some catch basin. Again, I don't know what everybody calls them. Storm drain, I think, is probably the most common. Catch basin, curb inlet. That water is going to flow into this like mystery hole in the road and disappear. And where it disappears is into a separate system of pipes that again dumps that water directly with no treatment to some other body of water. Hopefully I made that clear. Okay. Now, kind of getting back to the sewage overflow comment that I mentioned before. When we have storm events, the water that does manage to kind of seep and infiltrate into our soil can enter the stormwater, the sewer system. It can enter this system because of some issues of broken pipes, cracks in the joints. So roots are often a really common way that pipes just get cracked and broken from tree roots kind of going into them. A lot of our pipes, Pinellas County is old, if you didn't know that. And a lot of our pipes are really old. And so the pipes are just old and they're cracked. And that serves as a way for water to enter in to the sewer system that is not designed to manage all that excess water that we're receiving. So this overall concept, you may have heard of I&I. It stands for inflow and infiltration. So infiltration is like the old cracked pipes, defective joints, all the white icons. And then there can be direct connection through something called inflow. A lot of these this isn't a graphic from Florida. Probably the most relevant to us would be a yard clean out, which is typically those like green caps in your yard. That's like your direct connection to your private lateral. Sometimes if that green cap is missing, that's again a direct connection to that sanitary sewer system. So that's how during storm events, all that water is kind of being forced into these pipes that again are not typically designed to handle or treat all of that excess water. The wastewater treatment plants have no option, right? They're over their capacity of what they can treat. And so they're kind of forced to dump partially treated sewage. So that's how that happens, kind of in a nutshell. Now, we're going to switch and talk about water quality when it comes to stormwater. So I mentioned with quantity, there's something called erosion. Erosion can also lead to something called turbidity, which is more of a water quality issue. Turbidity is basically just mucky water. Anytime it doesn't seem like as clear as it should, or it looks murky or mucky, that's called turbidity. And turbidity is an issue because the organisms that live in that body of water rely on sunlight for the whole system to function. And when you have these tiny particles suspended in the water, the sunlight can't penetrate down. And there's something called submerged aquatic vegetation, plants that live under the water that produce the oxygen to support the system, that if they can't get the sunlight to do photosynthesis and survive, then it alters the whole system and can lead to significant issues. Contamination is another big one. I'll have a slide about that in a minute. There's many, many, many sources of contamination. That's a whole presentation in itself. But again, if we think about in that post-development setting, we have 55% of that water running off. As that water runs off across the surfaces, just think about all the stuff you walk by or drive over or drive through as you walk through like a city or your neighborhood, like the oil slicks, the cigarette butts, the trash. Heavy metal comes from something called brake dust. So anytime we're braking, we're basically creating a dust that contains heavy metals. So it's just carrying a lot of contamination as well. One thing that I really didn't learn until later in my career, but it's quite fascinating, is also increased stream temperatures is a water quality issue. So think about, right, it's starting to get really hot. And pavement gets really hot really fast in the summer. And so when we're getting, again, the bulk of our rain. So when we have these rain events, it's landing on a very, very hot surface. And then it's forced to travel along that surface to its final destination. And as it's traveling along the surface, it's warming up along the way. And so once it gets to its final destination, it's altering the temperature of the receiving body of water, which can stress the plants and animals that live there, right? We all kind of have a threshold for the temperatures that we like, and we might not be as happy if we're forced into a temperature we don't particularly prefer. The kind of last one is reduced dissolved oxygen. And that's a result of excess nutrients. So again, I talked about how it kind of collects all this stuff along its journey. One other thing that it's collecting that you probably have heard a lot about is like grass clippings, leaves, pet waste, all of these things that we often just think like it's natural. They are nutrients and nutrients are good. And yes, they are. However, again, we're thinking in this post-development setting. So leaves that fall in a natural setting are pretty much going to stay there and decompose there. But leaves that fall in an urban setting are going to land on a hard surface and then get swept up with this body of water, the stormwater that's flowing by, and enter again into the receiving body of water. So it's like this flush of nutrients that is not designed to be there, and it kind of overwhelms the system. The algae that's there loves it. They're like, yay, lots of nutrients, and they go crazy. They're happy, happy, happy. But as we know, all living things die. It's just a fact of life. Same applies to us. But when those algae die, then the decomposers move in and they're going crazy and they're having a party. However, the decomposers use up a lot of oxygen. So then the oxygen level goes down and then the fish say, hey, I can't breathe. And then that's when we start to get into fish kills. So all of this is stormwater. That's one of the biggest threats. It's very complex. There's a lot involved. And so again, this is another graphic from Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council that they kind of highlighted some of the common pollutants. So we have litter, of course, yard debris, pet waste is a big one, household waste, if not disposed of properly, auto waste, and fertilizer and pesticides are some of our bigger contaminants. Okay, so now we're getting into the what's your role? What can I do about it now that Lara's depressed me beyond me eating my lunch? Okay, so one of my favorite quotes, I don't know that I can, well, I'll give Shannon credit. Shannon Carnevale is my counterpart in Polk County. She said this, I don't know if it's an original quote from her or not, but she said, don't let your runoff run off. And I was like, I love that. It's so simple, but really anything that you can do in your yard to help rainwater stay on your property is going to be great when it comes to stormwater. It's going to reduce, right, that 55% of water that we're having, we in the person of your city or municipal staff are going to have to manage. It can also help to replenish our aquifer or nearby water levels, water table beneath our feet. And it kind of limits that erosion problem because it's slowing the flow of water. So how do you do this? Couple easy ways. This is by no means like an all-inclusive list, but a very simple one is check your rain gutters if you have them and just see where your downspout is pointing. I did a course, my water stewards course one year, we walked through a neighborhood, and I would say, I mean, we didn't do a formal assessment, but like 80% of the storm drains were just pointing straight down the driveway. That is not helping slow the flow of the water. It's not, don't let your runoff run off. That's like, get the water off my property, which is probably their intent. However, if you can just turn that downspout or get some of the extenders that they have and direct it to your yard or some landscape where that water has an ability to slow down, be filtered out, any of the contaminants and things by the plants, it can have a chance to infiltrate into the soil. That's going to be a very easy, quick fix that you can do. Another option is you can create a rain garden. You can actually couple these two together, but a rain garden is basically if you have an area of your yard that just tends to collect a lot of water, you can more or less modify that space to really capture that water and, again, further emphasize the filtration and the ability to infiltrate into the soil. Rain gardens, again, that's like 5 presentations in itself, but if you want to explore more, you can just, again, do some searches online for how to install a rain garden. And then, honestly, any vegetation that you plant in your yard is going to be helpful. All of it, like in this image here, right? If we think about a rain event, rain falling here, it's going to slow those rain droplets down. It's going to hit the leaf surface and slow that water and allow it, again, to infiltrate, be filtered by the plants. It prevents erosion. It provides habitat, all the things. It's like win-win-win by planting vegetation. We always support Florida-friendly landscaping. A couple more. Fertilizer. This is a big one. I remember as a kid, my dad had a set schedule for fertilizing, and we just went out. I thought it was the coolest thing to push that little thing and watch the pebbles fly out. However, now that I'm educated, we strongly emphasize not fertilizing on a schedule, but instead kind of learning your plants, learning your landscape. And when your plants are saying, like, I need fertilizer, is when you can go into gear with that. So we say only when needed, not on a schedule. And we also, if you know it's going to rain, it's really not a great time to apply your fertilizer. There's a lot more. We're getting into our fertilizer ban that's coming up as well. So just make sure you do your research, follow the label when it comes to fertilizing. Now, picking up after your pet. Honestly, like, nobody likes stepping in poop, so I'd almost do it more for that. Like, save your neighbors. Like my daughter, it was Mother's Day, went to the playground. My daughter stepped in dog poop and it like ruined our day because she couldn't wear her shoes anymore. So just if you're not going to do it for the water, do it for me and my children. But really, picking up after your pet is such a simple, easy way to support our local water resources and keep your shoes nice and clean. Lastly, you can adopt a drain. There's City of St. Pete, City of St. Pete Beach. All of unincorporated Pinellas County have adopted drain programs. So if you have a storm drain in your neighborhood that you want to adopt, or you can do more than one, and you can kind of help to keep it free and clear of litter and debris. It's a 1-year commitment, and you can find out more about that. Probably the easiest way is just jump on a search engine and type in Pinellas County Adopt a Drain or City of St. Pete Adopt a Drain. Or if you just do the Pinellas County one, I can direct you to the right people. But I coordinate that program, and I'd be happy to work with you on that. And if nothing else, if you don't do anything else after today's webinar, if you scan this QR code, it should take you, hopefully, to, I'm going to actually test it right now and just make sure, a website that allows you to search and find your local watershed. There's different resources available to you. This is a map of Pinellas County watersheds, but this one, yes, it sends you to the EPA site. It's called How's My Waterway? You can type in your exact address, and it will tell you what watershed you live in, as well as provide you with probably more data than you'd ever want to know about the body of water that the water from your property can ultimately flow into. So I encourage you, it's just a really good way to get connected and understand that, yes, my actions on my property can impact some body of water nearby. So scan that, check that out, or you can kind of pinpoint on this map. It's just a fun little activity. And then you're already here celebrating with us, so gold star. If you want to learn more, probably the easiest one-stop shop, you can again scan this QR code, or if you just do TBRPC for Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.org/stormwater stewardship, they put together an amazing website that covers everything we've done for this month. All of those cool images and graphics that they made are available to you for free to download. You can share on your social media. That's just awesome, awesome resource that they put together. If you know people that maybe wanted to attend this webinar or one of our other programs, but they couldn't, they're busy, they're working, I totally get it. We do have, we in the person of me and my colleague in Polk County have a podcast called Naturally Florida. And we have one episode that we dedicated to stormwater. There's also an associated student worksheet if you have any like high school, middle school students that supplement that episode, but it's great to just tune in and listen to on a commute. So that's available through this website, or you can just search for Naturally Florida on any podcast platform. We also have a stormwater pledge that you can take with a lot of the actions that I covered today. We've created a fun stormwater bingo. Again, if you have like kids or grandkids that you might want to engage in this month-long effort. And then you can search for, we have our own little I shouldn't say little, it's kind of long, hashtag called Stormwater Stewardship Month. So if you want to search, we've mostly been posting on Facebook, but if you want to post anything about the Stormwater Stewardship Month, please use that hashtag to just help us educate and promote more people. And with that, I will wrap up. I'll go over to the chat and see what questions you all had. And while I do that, if you would be so kind to complete a short program survey that's available through this QR code, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have to run, totally understand. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and thank you again for tuning in. And otherwise, I'm going to transition over to questions.